Tetris doesn't need an introduction. It was discovered by Alexei Pajitnov and developed for the Electronica 60 computer in 1984. Since then, the license to produce Tetris games has slowly diffused through the AAA world, and now you can probably play it on everything you own. A lot of people say that Tetris is a perfect game, and I think they're probably right. But just stating that as an obvious fact, or pointing out the game's lack of extraneous elements, ignores the real mechanical and textural differences in the many versions of Tetris. And I think that's kind of a shame, because there are a lot of great and distinct Tetris games out there. In this video, I'm going to take a look at a few of them, and try to uncover some deeper truths about Tetris's perfection. In 2008, I moved all the way across Canada in a month-long, zigzagging drive through the country. I had a Nintendo DS Lite, a pile of games, and as many snacks as my family saw fit to give me. I'm sure I'd played Tetris before that drive, maybe even Tetris DS, but some games are linked to a time in our lives, and for me, Tetris will always summon up the summer of 2008. Within the first week, I had beaten the game's 200-line marathon mode and unlocked Endless Marathon. From there, at least once per day, I played Endless Mode until the line counter maxed out at 999. My Tetris skills are shaped like Tetris DS, and its 20 NES-themed screens will be spinning forever in the corners of my memory. Now the other modes are great too, but Tetris is defined most of all by its ubiquitous Marathon mode, where the game ends after some number of lines are cleared, or just never ends at all. Tetris DS has a mechanic that you might not notice at first, called Infinity. It was probably part of the secret Tetris guideline at some point, since it's shown up in a few games. Most modern Tetris games have a feature called lock delay. Once a piece hits the stack, you can continue to move it for a little while before it locks into place. In Tetris DS, spinning the piece resets this delay.
Clear the bottom row of blocks to win. Clear the bottom row of blocks. Clear the bottom row of blocks to win.
Infinity has some pretty serious ramifications. Once you're good enough to play at the game's highest speeds, the only way to fail is by misplacing pieces. If your DS had a turbo button, you could even take breaks without losing. This is in stark contrast to the older versions of Tetris, which are very frictional. NES Tetris, which is a pretty popular competitive game, locks pieces as soon as they hit the stack. Because of this, it eventually reaches a point where humans can't mash the D-pad fast enough to get pieces to either side of the screen.
Left, though, so that's where it's gonna maximizing these last few Tetrises here is gonna what's gonna make the difference. Jonas is in trouble.
Oh no! And Jonas going down game number 1.
In Tetris DS, you're pretty much free to move the piece anywhere at any time. Although Tetris DS is obviously flawed, it's still a fun version of Tetris. Failure is always inevitable in Tetris, so the broken spin mechanic just prolongs the game, albeit by a very long time. Writers at the Hard Drop Wiki went as far as to call its endgame insultingly easy, and critics have noted that infinite spin is a game-breaking feature, but it does still require you to play at high speed for a long time. However, if we could play arbitrarily fast, Tetris DS would cease to even be a game. A tool-assisted speedrun of Tetris DS is like watching a god's data entry job, or a robot using a paint bucket tool for 45 minutes. For a perfect player, Tetris is a preordained death march toward some arbitrary score or line count. There's no possible way to lose. There isn't even any challenge. The cold robot hands build a perfectly shaped tower and then knock it down over and over. When a human plays Tetris, they're aspiring toward this endless, perfect repetition. We want the game to keep going. We want that perfect tower with a one-block space on the right side, or the nicely arranged line of potential T-spins. But if anyone actually managed to play Tetris perfectly, and perfectly consistently, then the game would immediately lose its appeal. Tetris is only fun because we have to keep pace with it, and because there's always a chance that a bad piece will show up, or we'll make a mistake. A human Tetris player is Sisyphus, who happily, endlessly repeats his absurd task. A Tetris god is a gambler in hell. The experience of enjoying Tetris is a uniquely human one. The board is completely abstract in nature, and the only theme that the pieces fit is the number of squares they're made of. These aren't really things that dogs can understand. Like all video games, Tetris is human because it was realized in a programming language, an abstraction from a machine language, which controls electricity in precisely engineered pieces of silicon and metal that were discovered to have useful properties over thousands of years of human history. Like all games, it's a beautiful, ridiculous, miraculous creation. In North America, Nintendo Tetris is king. The Game Boy version was bundled with the system, and it sold 35 million copies. The Tetris Company, which quote-unquote protects the Tetris brand, based their guidelines on the versions of the game that Westerners like. In Japan, the canonical version of Tetris is Sega's 1988 arcade game. Unlike Game Boy Tetris, Sega Tetris has a lock delay, and a very interesting theme. There's a serious difference in design between Nintendo and Sega Tetris, not just the piece colors. Like I said earlier, NES Tetris players eventually reach a kill screen, after which it's nearly impossible to make lines. Sega Tetris doesn't have this limit. If a player is good enough, they can keep on going forever. Once Sega Tetris had been mastered, an entire culture sprung up around it. People trained themselves by tracing out the shape of a greater than sign with the holes in their stack, and there are probably hundreds of lost or obscure fan games from that time. Of course, people were able to max out the score and line counters. This is sort of a flaw, especially for arcade owners who don't want people sitting on the machine for 45 minutes. Fixing a game like Tetris DS is pretty easy, just fix the lock delay. But rather than being obviously broken, Sega Tetris was just a little bit too easy. Unlike Tetris DS, it poses a question. If we give players the proper tools, how difficult can this game get? Ichiro Mihara's 1998 game Tetris the Grand Master is a more sophisticated version of Sega Tetris. In the Sega game, being able to play forever feels like an accident. You're not really meant to max out the score. TGM knows what it and its players are capable of. It ends at level 999 and assigns you a grade based on your score. In Sega Tetris, you can only rotate pieces clockwise and they collide with the ceiling for some reason. In TGM, pieces can be rotated in either direction, and you can buffer rotation and movement before the next piece comes out. These changes open the game up quite a bit, but they also allow TGM to go much faster. The Grandmaster is also a huge aesthetic upgrade. Each piece plays its own distinct sound before it spawns, and this no doubt becomes part of each player's muscle memory. The sounds that play when a piece touches the stack, moves, or locks are chunky and satisfying. My 100% legally obtained version of the game has broken music, but the click of pieces moving and locking makes its own distinctive rhythm. While the bizarre backdrops and sci-fi frame of Sega Tetris have an ironic appeal, TGM's graphic design is simple and confident. The abstract, techno-biological backgrounds harmonize with the soundtrack, and the game board rests in a brushed aluminum frame. The field is always extremely easy to read. Your stack is outlined in white, and locked pieces are given a darker color than the active one. Each mechanic that TGM introduces or changes is well thought out. Even the randomizer that picks your next piece has been revamped. It's biased against giving pieces that have come out recently. By giving the player more tools, Arika were able to speed the game up all the way to 20G, where each piece drops instantly to the bottom of the field. At high speeds, you need to shape your stack like a pyramid, so pieces can be slid down either side. Eight years later, Tetris DS implemented 20G in a much diminished form. Since it has an ending, TGM stresses beating the game as quickly as possible, while still getting the Grandmaster grade, and as such, TGM is considered a speed game, meaning people compete for fast times. This differs from NES Tetris, where players usually compete for high scores. The Grandmaster may be just a straightforward improvement on Sega Tetris, but it also sketches out a philosophy of Tetris that's very different from the Nintendo style. To get the game's maximum GM grade, you have to reach grade 1 in 4 minutes and 15 seconds, then grade S4 in 7.5 minutes, and finally pass level 999 with 126,000 points in under 13.5 minutes. Nintendo Tetris is a game of survival. You only have to keep up to win. In contrast, to get the GM grade you have to play way faster than the game forces you to, and you need to stack pieces cleanly. It forces players to develop speed and consistency on their own. You tell the game how fast you want to go, and if you work hard enough to meet its standards, maybe you can become a Grandmaster. In TGM, survival is only the first step. I've been playing TGM for at least an hour a day since I started work on this video. I even bought a fight stick for it. For a Tetris DS baby like me, TGM is ridiculously hard. I couldn't even get my head around spinning pieces clockwise at first. Over the course of these weeks, I've come to understand that mastering Tetris entails a complete, bone-deep trust in yourself and your controller. Panicking and mashing buttons just ends the game sooner. Because the player has to push the speed and difficulty on their own, they end up building Tetris skill like a craft or martial art. It's a game of methodical practice and slow improvement that only sees you occasionally challenge a new grade. It's not enough to just make it to the end. You have to actually master the game, and the challenge matches your toolkit perfectly. A nice bonus to forcing people to play fast on their own is that new players aren't kicked off the machine until the later levels. The game starts pretty slow, and even gives you a ghost piece for the first 100 levels. The Grandmaster 2, the Absolute, was released in 2000, and an enhanced version called the Absolute Plus was released a few months later. Tap adds a whole bunch of new modes, a mechanic called Sonic Drop, and a more difficult grading system. You're judged on a hidden points system that awards a grade every 100 points. However, you lose points over time, so speed is important. You lose points even faster as the game goes along. After you reach 20G at level 500, the game starts to shorten all of the various delays. The pause when you clear a line, the pause between piece drops, and the lock delay all get shorter. It's impossible to beat the game fast enough to get GM without Sonic Drop, which drops a piece instantly without instantly locking it. Once again, this shows that the mechanics and the challenge are perfectly harmonized. By making the grading requirements more obscure, Tap doubles down on TGM1's philosophy. It's not about looking for the right score, but training and improving yourself. Playing the Grandmaster series feels like climbing a mountain. You have a definite goal, but there seems to be an impossible climb to get there. Reaching the peak of TGM requires you to memorize and develop different skills and techniques into muscle memory. I would imagine that a lot of skilled players think they can probably play blindfolded. Here's what happens if you make it to level 1000 fast enough. The Grandmaster 3, Terror Instinct, takes TGM as far as it can go. It develops Miharu's vision of Tetris into a game that at its highest levels pushes the limits of human ability.
Letting go.
It adds a piece hold function, and you can now see your next 3 pieces. Of course, this comes with the customary step up in difficulty. Terror Instinct is the reason I wanted to make this video. It's the Mount Everest of my tired mountain climbing metaphor, except that more people have climbed Mount Everest than have beaten TGM 3. The scoring has been expanded to 33 different grades, and that grade is hidden from you until the end of the game. The only feedback about your performance is given in the form of cryptic messages, either cool or regret, appearing after each section. They also show up at other seemingly random times, so no guarantees. TI adds an element of restraint as well. To get a section cool, a player has to beat each section 2 seconds faster than their last. Because of this, great players have to hold themselves back for the first few hundred levels, or risk missing the time requirements. This is another way in which TGM departs from the traditional Tetris formula. Not only is TI more difficult than its predecessors, but it manages to remove the element of luck. The game has an account system, which rewards your account with a grade after your first Master Mode playthrough. Once the game notices that you're beginning to improve, it'll give you a promotional exam. These play the same as a normal Master Mode game, but give you the chance to increase the grade on your account. To be eligible for the Grand Master grade, you have to play at the highest, Master M level in the last 4 out of 7 games, and then do it once more in the promotional exam. In TAP, you just have to clear the invisible credits, but in TI you have to boost your grade with invisible Tetrises. It took the first American Grandmaster, Kevin DDR, 10 years.
Here it is, man. Oh shit. That was good.
Nice. Yeah, that was good.
Come on! That was a Tetris!
I think so, yeah.
That was a Tetris! Oh! Woo! Oh, that's good. Know.
I think it was a Tetris at the end. I'm like trying to tell you.
I heard it sound.
I remember you got the one on the bottom and then there's one on the top. What are you looking for here at the end?
The yellow one.
Woo!
Fuck yeah! Yeah! Yes! Oh! Yes!
Wow.
As of this recording, 19 people are TGM3 Grandmasters. To complete Terror Instinct is to contemplate the mysteries of its grade system, study its immaculately designed rotation mechanics and physics, and put in years of devoted, difficult practice. TGM3 is a game that demands we become a theologist, a scientist, and a martial artist. If TGM1 was an initial sketch, TGM3 represents a work of art so massive and detailed that it's almost hard to comprehend. It's a version of Tetris that preserves the game's universal appeal, while also transcending it toward a greater, perfecter game. While it still has the skeleton of guideline Tetris, The Grandmaster series has its own distinct challenges and metagame that are developed over the course of the series. The deliberate pairing of new mechanics with new challenges shows a deep understanding of what is possible in Tetris, and each game's grading system pushes the player away from quantitative score and towards a more profound knowing. By making scoring convoluted and hidden, Mihara transformed Tetris into a test of will, self-knowledge, and craft. Tap and TI both have interesting artistic flourishes that appear in their extra modes. Tap includes a doubles mode, and TI's nearly impossible Shirase provides master players with a whole bunch of interesting challenges.
So you were in for a treat.
So if you saw TGM2 Master and then saw TGM2 Death, right, this is like the same ratio between Master and Shirase. Shirase is the equivalent of Death. It means, what does it mean in Japanese?
It's like premonition,
I don't know.
foreboding sense of being about to die or something.
It's like,
What I'm trying to say here is that Tetris isn't just a concept. It exists as a whole set of possible games. Some of these games aren't perfect. The ceiling collision in Sega Tetris is confounding, and there's no good reason the pieces can't spin both ways. Tetris DS is broken as soon as you get good at it. If Tetris is a perfectly designed game in the abstract, then the Grandmaster series is profoundly perfect. They not only implement Tetris in an unflawed way, but they match the level of difficulty and player freedom perfectly. I decided to discuss the Grandmaster series because I think they're pretty cool games. But there are practically endless variations on Tetris. NES Tetris is a frictional survival game that's often about making the best of a bad situation. Tetris 99, also developed by Arika, is a lot better than Fortnite. Tetris Effect is probably the best guideline Tetris game ever made. It's a solid implementation with great visuals and a ton of extra modes. There's even Giant Tetris, which is giant. There's probably a Tetris game that you like, even if you haven't played it yet. If official games don't do it for you, there are a bunch of awesome, infinitely adjustable fan games as well. Hiboris, Texmaster, and Lockjaw among them. Infinite Gravity was actually introduced in the Japanese fan game Tetris Semi-Pro 68K, which inspired Ichiro Mihara to make TGM. I alluded to this in my intro, but Tetris is a game that was more discovered than it was invented. The developer, Alexei Pajitnov, was never able to make any real improvements to it on his own, and his other games, Hatris and Faces Tris 3, feel like jokes in the face of the monumental achievement of Tetris. There's no going back to the pre-Tetris world, but Night Moves and Dwice are just middling puzzle games. To really make Tetris better, designers like Mihara had to understand and build upon its unrefined perfection. While the earlier self-unaware Tetris games are perfect, because they descend from that perfect conceptual Tetris, the later games have been able to tweak and develop that perfection in different directions. TGM puts the onus on the player to master the game for themselves, and push themselves toward Grandmaster. Tetris DS is about casual, easy fun. Tetris Effect is mainly an emotional experience, which pairs the gameplay with sounds and visuals that point toward the universality of Tetris. These are all valid and interesting directions to take the game in, and I've been surprised over and over by the number of ways Tetris can be made. As far as we know, Tetris is a game that could only have been made by humans. Animals don't understand it, and they definitely don't like it. But more than that, when a human sees a tetramino falling, they know in their bones that they need to make a clean stack. Then, by following through on this desire, we discover that we can convert our stacking skills into a value. And then the goal becomes obvious. In the span of 4 blocks, Tetris completely unfolds for us. You can like or dislike it, but Tetris is universally understood. Humans are special because we can take the raw materials of the world and make the objects of our imaginations real. By shaping reality this way, others come to know us, and we come to know ourselves. Our free will, our societies, and our video games all unfold from this ability. The initial, simple impulse to shape the world produced all of history. And it's the same impulse that makes Tetris so human. It's a game about labor. The technology of Tetris, its piece preview, its hold function, the lock delay, has developed over time in a way that lets us play more quickly and efficiently. The Grandmaster series understands this technology perfectly, and is able to couple the level of difficulty to the player's level of efficiency. In the same way, production technology has allowed factories to make computers that run Tetris quickly and cheaply. Unlike real life, Tetris hints at a utopia where this technology doesn't lead to us losing our jobs to robot arms, but makes our work more meaningful and more satisfying. It's also just healthy to play Tetris. It boosts cognitive ability, helps kids with lazy eyes, and is an effective treatment for PTSD.
Clear the bottom row of blocks to win.
Pieces of different colors will fall apart.
Those are some of the reasons I have strong feelings about the Tetris Company, who've trademarked every aspect of a game I think ought to be the common property of humanity. Since the 90s, the Tetris Company has been trying to get free Tetris clones taken down, and it forces its restrictive guidelines on all official titles. They're obviously not doing this to protect the sanctity of the most played game in the universe, but to stop freeware developers and players from getting a piece of the pie.
That's one.
Pajitnov has said several times, in nicer terms than this, that he hates free software.
Clear the bottom row of blocks to win.
Pieces of different colors will fall apart.
And his and Hank Rogers' awful company definitely follows that philosophy. Lockjaw is a fan game released in 2006. It eventually became a pretty standard adjustable clone, but it was made to satirize the restrictive and casual guidelines that led to Tetris DS. Ride and Spinners mode was never implemented, but it mocked the player for trying to abuse lock delay the way they can in Tetris DS. It was an expression of the same love and desire to improve the game that led Sega Tetris fans to make Semi-Pro 68K and the Grandmaster. The developer of Lockjaw removed the game from his site in solidarity with the developer of Mino, a Tetris clone that was removed from circulation after the Tetris Company sued its developer. But Tetris is unstoppable. It pops up as 1 million first attempts at game development, and 1,000 super adjustable clones of TGM, and countless hours spent practicing or competing on Tetrio. Its spirit is in one of my favorite versions, this Pico 8 clone that feels like the best of TGM and Guideline put together. It's the perfect balance for casual play. It uses the improvements that the Grandmaster made to the series, with a more relaxed speed curve and Western-style piece rotation. Whether Hank Rogers and Alexei Pajitnov want it or not, improvements have been made to Tetris by fans and AAAs alike, and Tetris's history is a collective one. I'd like to thank the Tetris Concept community for the wealth of data they've collected on Tetris, and PetitPrince for his fantastic writing about the Grandmaster. I used his analysis and guides for TGM pretty extensively for this video, and I barely even scratched the surface.